Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I hope it'll help. All right, so let's go back to our class. I'll have to remember at the end to go back and show that after you all leave for the rest of your classmates. I forgot to start recording right away. All right, the first section in go up to the top. All right, week 5. It says, imagine a situation 6 months ago, you were reading about standing desks and how helpful they were for ergonomic issues in an office. And 3 months ago, you acquired a standing desk for your home, and you found it extremely beneficial for you and your back problems. You talked to coworkers, they also have mentioned back problems, and you decided to write a report for your boss recommending that your department provide the option of acquiring standing desks. Your report has to be persuasive in order for you to convince your boss to accept this recommendation. Would you give your boss an academic essay reviewing the literature? Would you provide an analysis of scholarly articles? Do you want to provide a synthesis of sources? If your report were composed of just these things, your boss probably wouldn't pay any attention to it. And since in many workplace situations, persuading a decision maker about a problem and a solution requires a lot more than pointing out what scholarly or trade journal sources say. It requires writing a report with background information on the problem from literature. In this case, you also need to work with your research-based report. So you'll have to show that there is a problem in your workspace. And in order to do that, you interview coworkers. You might do a survey. These possible research activities illustrate the use of primary research for your writing assignment. So this helps your decision maker to see that there really is a problem. All right, when you're doing standing desks, you have to do research on them, find out about how they help your back, or do they help your back. You would synthesize secondary research on the topic, but you want to do some primary research by talking to your classmates, your workmates, and find out if anybody else has the same problem you have. So you have to do something that would persuade your boss. It's not mentioned in here, but something that might be helpful, finding out if there are any grants out there that you might be able to apply for, that maybe you could purchase 2 standing desks for the office and do a trial run with, like 3 or 4 people sharing the desks, each desk, so that you can show how it will work into your workspace. All right, week 5 also works a little bit on digital object identifiers. This is one of the big new things coming up in the APA format. They're really emphasizing DOIs. All right, your draft of the research-based report we're going to be looking at that in week 6. So this is your time to really start working on considering your draft. All right, making sure you've done the primary research and the secondary research, and you have applied reader-centered strategies. I remember a couple years ago, I was the dean in the English department at TCC, and I had a policeman come knocking on my door, guns and the whole bit, and he wanted to talk to me about his son. And okay, that's what deans do. You talk to family members. Well, assuming that the student has to be with you and have permission, and his student was there. And he came in and he was complaining because his son, he'd just taken a test in his first English class, and he got a really low mark on it. And the father was complaining. He says, "This is so wrong." He says, "Did you know that your bookstore is out of the textbook?" He said, "So how in the world could my son have been expected to do this work when there are no textbooks?" So I asked, "Well, who was the professor?" And the student told me. And I looked at him, and I looked at the dad, and I said, "Well, did any of your other friends get a book?" And he said, "Well, I guess maybe some of them bought one." I said, "Did you talk to your professor about the textbook?" And he said, "Well, yeah, sort of." I said, "And did your professor tell you that he had 6 copies of the textbook in his office and that you could come in and check out the textbook anytime you needed in order to read chapter 1. And the kid hung his head and said, very quietly said, oh, yeah, he did kind of say that. And his dad looked at him, and then he looked at me and he says, ma'am, I'm very sorry for wasting your time. If you haven't done your research and talked to everybody involved in the situation before you start making this comments, it can be very troublesome. So as you're doing your report, make sure you don't just talk to your coworkers. Also talk to your boss. Find out if there are any things coming up that you don't know about, or any problems that you don't know about that could be helpful. All right, the first section that you were reading was writing interview protocols and conducting interviews. Oh, and another point on that. In this section, it talks about the fact that one of the things that you want to do as you are starting research is to make sure that you choose a topic that interests you. This is something I've had students do. They look at me and go, oh, you know, I'll bet Miss Stark would like X. And they'll do their research on something that doesn't interest them at all because they think it's going to interest me. And if it interests me, then I will like the topic. Don't do that. Find a topic that appeals to you, that interests you. And, you know, by doing that, if you're enthusiastic about your topic, it shows in your writing. And it makes for a much better writing than when you write something that bores you. So make sure that you are dealing with a topic that somehow, some way appeals to you. All right. You know, it talks about how to gather your research. We talked last week about the open-ended question, making sure that you don't ask questions that just take yes/no answers. Make sure that as you are doing your research, when you first start talking to the person, start with easy questions. It says, in other words, you don't want to start out with, well, have you ever been date raped? And someone goes, what? Where did that come from? Starting out instead, so what's your name? Where did you go to school? Where are you from? You know, building up so that they begin to know who you are before you actually jump into the questions. So, you know, work your way up to the harder questions. The topic, tell me about what you think about letting your children watch television. You know, it's not a yes/no question, and it requires them to think about it. Okay, qualitative research is also about finding new information in your research. Your interviewers may give you some ideas that you hadn't even thought about. One of the things it suggests in here is that you consider having a secondary interview. You'll have one interview where you ask your set questions, but then a second interview with them later on. Frequently, somebody else will, during the course of their interview, will give you an idea or a thought of something you hadn't even considered before. And so having a second short interview gives you a chance to go back and review questions you hadn't thought about, or get more details from them. Or on the other hand, they may think of things after they've gone home. All right, always keep things in writing so that you know that you're asking the questions as you come along. Don't make your interview too long. Do a practice run with a friend. Kind of get an idea of, you know, and ask them to tell you, do you like the questions, you don't like the questions, any suggestions, so that when you actually get into your interview, you're more prepared. All right. So anyway, take some time, go through, start with your script. There's a suggestion on how to put your interview together. And so do go ahead and take some time and make sure you are listening. And I think I mentioned this last week. You might want to consider, if your interviewee doesn't mind, you might record your lesson. And one of the things is make sure whether your person, if what they're saying is private, and you know they don't want their name being mentioned and such. All right, our next reading section. There's the video on how to find your digital information. This is something relatively new in the last few years, and you're probably going to see more of it as people are doing their searches through search sites. All right, how to format references. And again, we talked about that last week, and I showed you in Microsoft Word how to do it. All right, managing your time, compiling your information. How much time have you got? How much time do you need to put into something? How do you just organize your work? How much time have you got to do your research? How much time does it usually take you to put a report together?
It depends on the requirements, to be honest. But typically for me, it takes me about 4 hours to gather like all of the resources and take my notes in a Word document and organize it that way. And then it's a lot easier from there to write the paper.
Right. How many of you do outlines? Okay.
I tried to.
Okay. It's really helpful just to have even if it's just an ABC one, not going into details, but just so that you figured out how to organize your material, how you want to put it together. All right, compiling your information. Taking some time to think about it before you actually write. And the funny thing, and I'm sure you all have found, is sometimes you get into doing your research and something will pop out at you that you had never even seen before, giving you a whole new idea. So just be open to changing as you go along. I think when my son was in his junior year in high school, his English teacher made them turn in the outline for their research paper in October. And then their research paper wasn't done until spring. And she said that the research paper had to exactly follow the outline that they wrote in October. And I mean, it's hard being the English teacher mother. But it would shock me if anybody had, after you've done your outline, if you didn't change something when you actually sit down to write your paper, that means you're not really thinking about it. You're not coming up with new ideas. All right, revision. What was my lesson on revision? What do you do with revision? When do you revise? All right, 24 hours. Don't try to look at your paper immediately after you've written it. We all think we're going to be able to do that. But when you look at your paper too soon after you've written it, you see what you meant to write. You don't see what's actually there. You ever gotten a quiz back, a test back, and you look at the answer and you got it wrong, and you're going, what? I knew that right answer. Somehow there was a disconnect between your brain and your pencil, but because your brain said, I'm going to write this, that's what you saw, even though that wasn't what you wrote. So allow some time after you've read your paper for it to get cold before you go back and review it. And it's also helpful to read it out loud to yourself. You'd be surprised how many errors you find by doing that. My Cox has been slow this week. All right, techniques to help your reader grasp points. This was a good little lesson on how to read and then analyze, how to put things together. It talks about having headings for your sections, executive summaries, and such. When you have lists of questions, formatting them with bullets rather than putting them in as sentences. The bottom line is generally understood to mean the total cost, but it can also refer to conclusions that your report's going to come to. It says, imagine how unhappy you would be if you submitted a report and your audience came up with a message totally different from what you intended. And I mentioned this to you again before, make sure that you get a good feeling for what your reader knows before you start putting your report together. By doing that, sometimes as we are doing our research, we become We really get information about, well, we get a lot of information in our head. We become experts, at least for now, for this 8 weeks in that particular subject. Well, your manager, your colleagues do not have the advantage of that research that you've done, so you have to make sure that you do provide them with the research that they're going to need in order to understand your topic. All right, setting together your argument strategies. They've got the gas cap T, generalizational analogy, sign, consequence, authority, principle, and testimony. And these are some of the things that you can get pulled together to make a good argument. Again, take your time, read through this section on how to do the gas cap T strategies and how to make it work within your paper. And they've got some sections here that walk you through that. Generalization, your STAR system. Sufficient number of accurate and reliable examples. How much does it take to convince somebody of something? Someone was saying the other day, talking about the COVA and all the new drugs that they're coming out to use it. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in the first 1,000 testing out anything. So how many people would it take before you feel comfortable? But have a look. Analogy is comparing two things. If you've got your readers familiar with one thing, you can convince them about your second thing by joining it to the other one. We get statistics. We have cause and effect. Who are credible sources? When you see it on TV, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. Is that the guy that you want to listen to take this new medication? He may not be the real authority figure you want to work with. Principle, a truth that we know. And then testimony, which is personal experience. But think about those as you're thinking about your paper so that you make sure you provide the information that your reader is going to need. Interviews, surveys, and focus groups. Ways of getting feedback using interviews, and it walks over how to do an interview. Surveys, how do we do a survey? And there's a section on focus groups where you get people who are from one group together as a representative of a even larger group. But looking at the information that you can pull to your paper so that your boss is going to feel more comfortable about, or whoever's in charge will feel more comfortable in understanding that. Be glad when the election's over. All right, the next section there's a sample report for the fourth paper. You can go in and have a look at that. There's a video that goes over that report, and then there's another sample paper that you can have a look at. Gives you a better view of other people that have done this in the past. And then your discussion topics. I think all of you have been kept up with this, but make sure that when you do your discussion topics, that first one, your first comment on the first one is posted by Friday. People want to comment on your paper, but if your paper's not there, they can't comment on it. So please make sure you got that posted by Friday. Also, if you need any more input, your draft for writing assignment number 3 is due to me by Friday. So please get that to me so I can make comments and make suggestions back to you. If I've already looked at yours, you don't have to send it to me again unless you've got some new thoughts on it. All right, the final paper will be due, of course, on Monday on that. So How are you all feeling about what you've done so far this week? And are there any specific questions that I can answer for you or help you with?
Just a quick question. So I know that for the example, the sample paper for the 4th assignment, it has in the appendix an example of the survey questions that they used. Will we have to do that for ours as well?
It's helpful. If you're going to actually be doing a survey or you're interviewing people, you put adding that in the appendix. Yes.
Okay.
It gives your reader an opportunity to know what questions you were asking.
Okay.
So for, let's say for our research, I'm interviewing people instead of doing a survey. We're good to, go that route, correct?
That's fine.
Okay.
So what you might do, you don't have to put their interviews, but just a list of the questions that you're going to ask.
Okay.
All right. And again, do make sure that you know if they feel comfortable with their names being used. And actually, it's probably a better idea just to call them worker A, worker B, and leave it at that.
Okay.
And, if you actually quote one of your co-workers, that will have to be in your references. But you can call, anonymous worker A, anonymous worker B, and then the date that you interviewed them. You just do it as a personal interview. So you can quote your workers.
Awesome.
All right, other thoughts? Okay. All right, folks. Well, have a wonderful week. Thanks for being here right on time. I appreciate it. And I hope it's nice. The sun is shining out there, so go out and enjoy the rest of this lovely evening. Bye. See you now. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night.
Good night. Thanks.
Night. Unless you got a question, go ahead. All right. All right. So for those of you who weren't here, I forgot to start recording at the very beginning. So I'm going to back up a little bit and go to the course home and the week 5 notes. All right. I had a meeting today that we are at UMUC-GC going to be going to the APA version 7 starting August the 5th. So I know that Microsoft Word, for example, there's section in there on doing references. It actually is only using version 6. So, I went to the Microsoft site to see how soon they thought they might be building in the information about Microsoft 7, and who knows. So, it still is going to be APA 6 until whenever. So what I've done for you, I've posted in Weebly some of the comments that were made on what's new in APA 7, things that you will need to know about. There's also a link on notable changes and such. I also added a link on my Weebly for this site called SiteFast that someone mentioned in the meeting, and it will allow you to have APA 6, APA 7, MLA 8, Chicago Style Manual, and there's Modern Language Association 7th edition. But it will help you put together your references, which is now going to be in bold, and it will help you put together your entries. It shows you how to do it. And again, that's in my Weebly site. So go ahead and go there. There's a link to that new information, and then there's a link to this. I also provided a link for you in the homepage on this lesson on, it's called Read Speeder. It's a free little class, just takes about a couple of weeks. So maybe between summer classes and fall classes, you might want to work on becoming a bit of a speed reader. I took a course like this in college freshman year, and it really helped a lot. You have a lot of reading to do, and it helps you learn to read better. One of the clues on reading faster, though, is actually knowing the material before you read it. So if you take a few minutes and you skim your work before you actually start reading it, when you go back to read it, you will be familiar with the topic, and it'll make you read it even faster. But do go ahead and open this up. It's real easy to do, and it gives you a good lessons on how to become a speed reader. All right. Trying to think if there's anything else that I missed from you. All right, so just don't forget, by Friday, I want your discussion board, and I want your drafts for writing assignment number 3. Sunday, I need your comments to your classmates, and Monday, I need writing assignment number 3 turned in. So you all have a great week, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.